Child's innocent choice shook an entire Apache village to its core. When the widowed chief asked his son to choose a new mother among 7 respected Apache women, no one expected the boy to walk past them all and point to the white captive instead. What happened next would test tradition, loyalty, and the boundaries of love. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The Arizona Territory stretched endlessly under the scorching sun of 1877, a landscape of red rocks and endless horizons where the Apache people had roamed freely for generations. In the heart of this vast wilderness stood a village of the Chiricahua Apache, nestled between towering canyon walls that provided shelter from both the elements and the encroaching white settlers who threatened their way of life with each passing season. Mako, the chief of this band, stood at the edge of the village, his weathered face gazing toward the distant mountains where his wife's spirit now wandered. She had been taken by illness 3 moons past, leaving behind a void that echoed through their dwelling and through the heart of their 7-year-old son, Clesion. The boy had his mother's gentle eyes and his father's strong jawline, a combination that reminded Mako daily of what they had lost and what still remained to be cherished. The chief was a formidable man, standing tall with broad shoulders that spoke of countless battles fought and won. His long black hair, streaked with silver at the temples, hung past his shoulders, adorned with eagle feathers that marked his status among his people. Deep lines etched his face, each one a story of survival, wisdom, and the weight of leadership that had rested upon him for nearly 2 decades. Despite the grief that shadowed his features, there remained an undeniable strength in his bearing, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. The village elders had approached him repeatedly since his wife's passing, urging him to consider taking another wife. It was not merely about companionship, they insisted, but about the boy. Clesion needed a mother's guidance, a woman's gentle hand to balance the harsh realities of Apache life that his father would teach him. The responsibilities of leadership left Mako with precious little time to provide all that a growing child required. Among the elders was Goyakla, an ancient warrior whose counsel Mako had always valued. The old man had fought alongside Mako's father and had seen 3 generations of Apache children grow into warriors and mothers. His face resembled the very canyons that surrounded them, carved deep with the passage of time and experience. "The boy watches the other children with their mothers," Goyakla had said one evening as they sat by the council fire. "He tries to hide his longing, but I see it in his eyes. He is too young to carry such emptiness, Mako. Your grief is yours to bear, but his childhood should not be shadowed by loss alone." Mako had nodded slowly, knowing the truth in those words. He had seen how Clesion's laughter had dimmed, how the child often sat alone, carving small figures from wood with unusual intensity for one so young. The boy was trying to fill his hours, to distract himself from the absence that permeated their home. 7 women had been presented as potential wives, each one worthy in her own right. There was Adsila, a skilled healer whose hands could draw poison from wounds, and whose knowledge of herbs was unmatched in the village. Genoa was renowned for her beadwork, creating patterns so intricate they seemed to tell entire stories in colored shells and stones. Helona possessed a voice that could calm restless children and bring tears to the eyes of the most hardened warriors when she sang the old songs. Kachine was the finest cook among them, able to make even the humblest rations taste like feast food. Makawi could track game through terrain where others saw no sign, a huntress of exceptional skill. Nita was a storyteller who kept the Apache traditions alive through her tales, enchanting young and old alike. And finally, there was Shima, a woman of quiet dignity who had raised 4 children of her own into strong, respected members of the tribe. Each woman had been brought before Mako over the course of several weeks, and each time he had watched them with Clesion, observing how they interacted with his son. Some had tried too hard, showering the boy with attention that felt forced and uncomfortable. Others had maintained a respectful distance, perhaps too much distance for a child who craved connection. None had seemed to spark anything in Clesion's eyes. No recognition, no comfort, no sense of rightness that would indicate a true bond could form. But there was another presence in the village, one that complicated the situation considerably. 3 months before Mako's wife had fallen ill, a raiding party had returned from a skirmish with white settlers who had encroached too far into Apache territory. Among the supplies and horses they had taken was a young white woman, captured not out of cruelty but as a matter of survival and leverage in the ongoing struggle between their peoples. Her name was Sarah Coleman, though she had initially refused to speak it or anything else for the first 2 weeks of her captivity. She was 23 years old, with hair the color of autumn wheat that fell in waves past her shoulders, and eyes the startling blue of the sky at midday. Her face, though marked by the hardship of her situation, possessed a delicate beauty that seemed almost fragile against the harsh backdrop of Apache life. Yet there was steel beneath that porcelain exterior, a determination that had kept her alive and fighting when others might have succumbed to despair. Sarah had been traveling with her family in a wagon train heading west toward California, dreaming of the new life that awaited them in the fertile valleys they had heard so much about. Her father had been a schoolteacher in Missouri, and her mother had filled their home with music and laughter. She had one younger sister, Abigail, who had been her closest companion and confidant. The attack had come at dawn, swift and brutal, and when the dust had settled, Sarah had been separated from her family, unsure if they had survived or perished in the chaos that had erupted around them. The early days of her captivity had been a nightmare of confusion and terror. She had been bound and watched constantly, treated not cruelly, but with a wariness that made clear she was viewed as both valuable and potentially dangerous. The Apache women had regarded her with curiosity and suspicion in equal measure, while the warriors had largely ignored her presence, except to ensure she did not escape. But as weeks turned into months, something had shifted. Sarah possessed a natural gift for languages, and she had begun to pick up Apache words and phrases, slowly building a bridge of communication with her captors. She had also demonstrated a willingness to work, refusing to sit idle while others labored. At first, the women had rebuffed her attempts to help, but gradually they had allowed her to assist with gathering wood, preparing food, and tending to basic tasks around the village. It was during this time that she had encountered Klijan. The boy had been watching her with open curiosity one afternoon, as she struggled to carry water from the stream in vessels she was not accustomed to using. She had stumbled, spilling half the precious liquid, and had sat down in frustration, fighting back tears of exhaustion and homesickness. Klijan had approached cautiously, like a wild creature testing the safety of a new presence. He had said nothing, but had picked up one of the vessels and shown her the proper way to balance it, demonstrating with patient gestures until she understood. When she had finally managed to carry the water without spilling, the boy had offered her the smallest of smiles before darting away. From that day forward, a tentative friendship had formed between the white captive and the chief's son. Klijan would appear at odd moments, sometimes bringing her small gifts, a smooth stone, a carved stick figure, a handful of berries. Sarah, in turn, had begun to teach him small things: how to braid leather cords into stronger rope, how to identify certain plants her mother had taught her about, simple songs from her homeland that required no shared language to appreciate. Mako had observed these interactions with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was grateful to see light returning to his son's eyes, to hear the boy's laughter echoing through the village once more. On the other hand, the woman was white, one of the very people whose endless westward expansion threatened to destroy everything the Apache held sacred. She represented the enemy, even if she herself had committed no crime against his people. Now, as the time had come to make a decision about his future and his son's well-being, Mako found himself caught between duty and the unexpected complications that Sarah's presence had created. The council had agreed that Klijan should have a voice in choosing his new mother, believing that the child's acceptance was crucial to the success of any new union. It was an unusual approach, but these were unusual times, and Mako had agreed to honor his son's feelings in the matter. The ceremony was to take place at sunset, when the 7 Apache women would stand before Klijan and his father. The boy would walk among them, and whichever woman he chose would become Mako's wife, binding herself to the chief and taking on the role of mother to his child. The entire village would bear witness, making the choice sacred and irrevocable. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of crimson and gold, as the village gathered for the ceremony. The 7 Apache women stood in a semicircle near the central fire, each dressed in their finest doe-skin garments adorned with beadwork and shells that caught the fading light. Their faces were composed, dignified, each one aware of the honor and responsibility that came with potentially becoming the wife of their chief and mother to his son. Mako stood tall and stoic, his ceremonial buckskin shirt decorated with intricate patterns that told the story of his lineage and his victories. His face revealed nothing of the turmoil that churned within him, the uncertainty about whether he was ready to replace the woman who had stood by his side for so many years, who had given him the greatest gift of his life in their son. Clesion stood beside his father, small and solemn in his own ceremonial clothing. The boy's dark eyes moved across the faces of the 7 women, studying each one with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. Mako had spoken with him that morning, explaining the importance of this choice, telling him that whomever he selected would become part of their family, would share their dwelling, would guide him as he grew into manhood. "Choose with your heart, my son," Mako had said, kneeling to meet the child at eye level. "Choose the one who makes you feel safe, who reminds you that even though your mother has walked on to the spirit world, you are not without a mother's love in this life." Goyakla stepped forward, his ancient voice carrying across the assembled villagers as he spoke the traditional words that would begin the ceremony. He called upon the spirits of their ancestors to guide the child's choice, to ensure that this union would bring strength and harmony to their chief's house, and, by extension, to the entire band. As the elder's words faded into the evening air, Mako placed his hand gently on Clesion's shoulder and nodded. The boy stepped forward, beginning to walk slowly past each woman. Adsila smiled warmly at him, her healer's hands folded peacefully before her. Chenoa held out a small beaded bracelet she had made, a gift to show her willingness to care for him. Halona hummed softly, a lullaby that many Apache children knew from their cradles. But Clesion's steps did not slow. He moved past Kachine, who had prepared his favorite foods and brought them as an offering. He walked by Makawi, who had offered to teach him the secrets of tracking that she knew. Nita began to tell the opening of a story, one she knew children loved, but the boy continued forward. Even Shima, with her grandmotherly warmth and gentle eyes, could not make him pause. He reached the end of the line and stopped. The villagers waited in confused silence. Mako felt his chest tighten, uncertain what his son's hesitation meant. Had none of the women touched his heart? Would they need to search further afield, perhaps among the other Apache bands that ranged across this territory? Then Clesion turned, his small body pivoting to face a different direction entirely. His arm rose, and his finger pointed with absolute certainty toward a figure that stood at the very edge of the gathering, half hidden in the shadows of the gathering dusk. Sarah Coleman stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat as every eye in the village turned toward her. She had been watching the ceremony from a distance as she watched most Apache rituals, present but apart, a witness to a culture that was not her own, and yet had become her entire world for these past months. She wore a simple dress made from traded cloth, patched and worn from her journey and her time in captivity, her wheat-colored hair pulled back in a practical braid. "Her," Clesion said, his young voice clear and unwavering in the stunned silence. "I choose her." A ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the crowd. The 7 Apache women stood frozen, some with expressions of disbelief, others with clear disapproval. This was unprecedented, impossible, an insult to tradition and to the natural order of things. How could the chief's son choose a white woman, a captive over the finest women their own people had to offer? Mako felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Of all the outcomes he had anticipated, this had never entered his mind. He had expected his son might choose poorly from among the 7, might select based on childish reasoning rather than wisdom. But this was beyond anything he had prepared himself to face. Goyakla's weathered face showed surprise, but also something else, a glimmer of thoughtfulness that suggested the old warrior's mind was already working through the implications of this choice. Other elders began to speak in urgent, hushed tones, their agitation clear even if their words were not distinct. Sarah took an involuntary step backward, shaking her head. "No," she said in halting Apache, words she had learned during her captivity. No, this is not right. I should not be chosen. But Clijin moved toward her with determined steps, his small hand reaching out to grasp hers. The physical contact was gentle but insistent, a child's plea that transcended language and culture. "You are kind," he said in Apache, knowing she would understand at least some of his words. "You see me. You do not try too hard or too little. You are my friend." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes, a combination of emotions so complex she could hardly name them all. Fear, certainly, for what this choice might mean for her already precarious position among these people. Confusion about why this child had formed such an attachment to her. And beneath it all, a profound sadness for this motherless boy who had somehow found comfort in the presence of a woman who was as lost and alone as he was. Mako stepped forward, his face a carved mask of conflicting duties. As chief, he had given his word that his son's choice would be honored, that the boy's heart would guide this decision. But as a leader of his people, how could he take a white woman as his wife? How could he elevate a captive to the position of honor that belonged to an Apache woman? The political ramifications alone could split his band, could undermine his authority at a time when unity was more crucial than ever. "Clijin," Mako's voice was firm but not harsh. "Do you understand what you are asking? This woman is not one of our people. She knows nothing of our ways, our traditions, our beliefs. She is white, one of those who drive us from our lands, who kill our people and break their promises like dry reeds." The boy looked up at his father, and in his eyes was a clarity that seemed to belong to someone much older. "Mother used to say that the spirits send us what we need, not always what we expect. You taught me to be brave, to follow what I know is true even when others do not see it. My heart tells me she is the one. She understands being alone. She understands missing someone who is gone, and she has been kind to me without wanting anything in return." The simplicity and wisdom of the child's words struck Mako like a physical blow. He looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for perhaps the first time since she had been brought to their village. He saw past the pale skin and foreign features, past the dress and the braided hair that marked her as an outsider. He saw a young woman who had endured captivity with dignity, who had not broken under the weight of her circumstances, who had found small ways to contribute and connect, even when she had every reason to retreat into bitterness and despair. And he saw something else, something that unsettled him even as it intrigued him. He saw strength, not the strength of warriors or the endurance of Apache women who could traverse vast distances carrying heavy loads, but a different kind of strength. The strength to remain human in inhumane circumstances, to offer kindness when kindness had been stripped away from her own life, to build bridges when walls would have been easier. Goyakla approached, his hand raised to request permission to speak. Mako nodded, grateful for the interruption to his racing thoughts. The old warrior's eyes moved between the chief, the boy, and the white woman before he began to speak. "I am old," Goyakla said, his voice carrying the weight of many decades. "I have seen much that I thought I understood, only to learn later that my understanding was incomplete. When I was young, I believed that strength was found only in victory over enemies. I have learned that sometimes the greatest strength is found in unexpected mercy, in choosing a path that others fear to walk." He paused, letting his words settle over the gathered villagers. The boy has spoken from his heart, as his father instructed him to do. He has not chosen foolishly or in defiance. He has chosen the person who has brought light back into his eyes, who has reminded him what it feels like to be cared for. Is this not what we wanted for him? Is this not why we asked him to choose? Another elder, Kuruk, stepped forward with clear disagreement etched into his features. "But she is white. How can we accept this? Our people are dying because of her people. Every season brings more of them, taking our hunting grounds, poisoning our waterholes, killing our buffalo. To elevate one of them to be the wife of our chief is to spit upon the graves of all those we have lost to their greed and violence." Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the crowd. The 7 Apache women stood silent, their faces showing varying degrees of hurt, anger, and confusion. Shima, the eldest among them, shook her head slowly and turned away, unable to watch any longer. Mako raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent immediately. When the chief spoke, every ear strained to hear his words. Kuruk speaks truth about the wrongs committed by the white people. I have lost friends, family members, and hunting grounds to their endless expansion. My own wife fell ill partly because we were driven into lands where the water was not as pure, where the game was less plentiful, where survival itself became harder with each passing year. Sarah felt each word like a stone upon her chest, the weight of collective grief and anger for crimes she had not personally committed, but which her people had indeed perpetrated. She understood enough of what was being said to grasp that her presence represented far more than just herself. She carried the burden of an entire race's transgressions. Mako continued, his voice growing stronger as he worked through his thoughts aloud, allowing his people to witness the deliberation of their leader. But I also know this. Sarah Coleman did not choose to come here. She did not ride against us with weapons. She was taken from her family, torn from everything she knew, and yet she has not allowed hatred to poison her heart. She has worked alongside our women. She has learned our language. She has shown respect for our ways even when she did not fully understand them. And most importantly, she has given my son something I could not give him myself, hope that life can still hold gentleness after great loss. He turned to face Sarah directly, and for the first time since her capture, she met the chief's eyes without flinching, without looking away. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended the barriers of language and culture. She saw in his dark eyes the same struggle she felt in her own heart, the tension between what seemed logical and what felt true, between the safety of familiar paths and the risk of unknown territories. Sarah Coleman, Mako said, switching to English words he had learned from traders and scouts over the years, his accent thick but his meaning clear. My son has chosen you. By our law, by our tradition, I am bound to honor his choice, but I will not force you into this. You are a captive, yes, but even a captive has the right to refuse this path. Speak now, before all these witnesses. Will you accept this role? Will you become wife to me and mother to Clesion, knowing all that it means, all that it requires, all that you will be giving up of your former life? The question hung in the air like smoke from the central fire, curling around everyone present. Sarah's mind raced through the implications of both answers. If she refused, she would likely remain a captive indefinitely, always on the periphery of this community, never fully accepted, never truly belonging anywhere. Her chances of returning to her own people were slim to none. The territories were too vast, the dangers too many, and she had no idea if her family had even survived the attack that had brought her here. But if she accepted, she would be choosing to step fully into a world that was not her own, to bind herself to a man she barely knew, to a people who had every reason to hate what she represented. She would be abandoning any hope of returning to the life she had known, the dreams she had cherished of California, and a fresh start with her family. Yet as she looked at Clesion, still holding her hand with such trust and hope in his young face, she realized that perhaps she had already made this choice weeks ago, in small increments, each time she had smiled at the boy, each time she had accepted his small gifts, each time she had felt her heart warm at his laughter. Without meaning to, without planning it, she had already begun to care for this child, and the thought of being torn away from him now brought an ache to her chest that surprised her with its intensity. And when she allowed herself to truly look at Mako, to see beyond the title of chief and captor, she saw a man who was trying to do right by his son, who was willing to face the disapproval of his own people, if it meant bringing happiness back into his child's life. She saw strength, yes, but also vulnerability, grief not fully healed, and a loneliness that mirrored her own. I accept, Sarah said, first in English and then in halting Apache, wanting to be certain everyone understood her choice. I will be wife and mother. I will learn your ways. I will honor your people. The words seemed to release something in the air, a tension that had been building suddenly finding its outlet. Some villagers nodded in acceptance, willing to trust their chief's judgment and the sincerity they heard in the white woman's voice. Others turned away, unwilling to witness what they saw as a betrayal of Apache blood and tradition. The 7 women dispersed quietly, Adsila offering a small nod of respect as she passed, while Chenoa's face remained stony and unreadable. Goyakla stepped forward once more, raising his arms to address the gathering. "It is decided then. By the choice of the child and the acceptance of both parties, we will proceed with the binding ceremony. Let those who support this union stay and bear witness. Let those who cannot accept it depart in peace, carrying no ill will toward those who choose differently." Roughly half the villagers remained, including most of the elders and the warriors who had fought longest alongside Mako. Their presence was a vote of confidence in their chief's leadership, even if they harbored private doubts about the wisdom of his son's choice. The ceremony that followed was beautiful in its simplicity. Mako and Sarah stood facing each other while Goyakla wrapped their hands together with a braided cord, made from leather and sinew, symbolizing the binding of two lives into one shared path. Words were spoken in Apache, ancient phrases that called upon the spirits to bless this union, to grant them strength in times of hardship, wisdom in times of confusion, and patience in times of conflict. Klijan stood between them, his small hands reaching up to touch both his father's arm and Sarah's, physically connecting the three of them. When the final words were spoken and the cord was tied, the boy looked up at Sarah with such pure joy that tears spilled down her cheeks unchecked. That night, as Sarah sat in Mako's dwelling for the first time as his wife, the weight of what she had done settled upon her shoulders. The interior of the dwelling was dim, lit only by the small fire that burned in the center. Klijan had already fallen asleep on his bedding, exhausted by the emotion and ceremony of the day. Mako sat across the fire from her, studying her face in the flickering light. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions and uncertainties. Finally, he spoke, his English improving as he focused on making himself understood. "I know this is not what you wanted for your life," he said quietly. "I know you did not dream of becoming a Apache wife when you traveled west with your family. But my son has chosen you, and I believe he has chosen well. You have shown courage and kindness when you could have shown only bitterness. That speaks to who you are inside, beyond the color of your skin, or the people you were born among." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly vulnerable in the presence of this man who was now her husband, a concept so strange she could hardly process it. "I don't know if I can be what he needs," she admitted. "I don't know your stories, your songs, your ways of teaching children. I'm afraid I'll fail him." "My wife," Mako said, and Sarah realized it was the first time he had called her that. She did not know everything either when she became a mother. No one does. You learn by doing, by loving, by trying even when you are afraid. Klijan has already seen this in you. He has seen you try to carry water even when you did not know how. He has seen you work even when your hands blistered. He has seen you continue even when you had every reason to give up. These are the lessons that matter most. Over the following weeks, Sarah began her transformation from captive to wife, from outsider to mother. The Apache women who had accepted the union took her under their guidance, teaching her the skills she would need. Adsila showed her which plants could heal and which could harm, patient with Sarah's mistakes as she learned to identify them by leaf shape and scent. Makawi took her on short hunting expeditions, teaching her to move quietly through the brush and to read the signs that animals left behind. Klijan became her constant companion and her most enthusiastic teacher. He showed her how to make the Apache bread his mother used to prepare, guiding her hands as she patted the dough flat. He taught her the words for everything they encountered, pointing at objects and repeating their names until she could say them properly. He shared with her the stories his mother had told him, and though Sarah's Apache was still rough, she understood enough to grasp the wisdom and beauty embedded in the tales. And slowly, carefully, something began to grow between Sarah and Mako. It started with respect, a mutual acknowledgement of the sacrifice each had made for Klijan's sake. Mako had defied significant opposition from his own people, and Sarah had abandoned any hope of returning to her former life. That shared commitment to the boy's well-being created a foundation upon which other feelings could build. They began to talk in the evenings after Klijan slept, Mako practicing his English, and Sarah practicing her Apache, meeting somewhere in the middle with a hybrid communication that was part words, part gestures, and part simple understanding. He told her about his wife, about the day they had met, about the qualities he had loved most in her. Sarah spoke of her own family, of her father's quiet wisdom and her mother's musical voice, of her sister Abigail and the games they had played as children. These conversations revealed to each of them that their griefs were not so different, that loss was loss regardless of the language in which it was mourned, and in that shared understanding of sorrow, they found the first threads of genuine connection. One evening, nearly 2 months after their binding ceremony, Sarah was teaching Clesion an English counting song when Mako returned from a council meeting with news. His face was troubled, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. "The soldiers are coming," he said without preamble. "Scouts have seen them 3 days' ride from here. They are searching for Apache, to force us onto reservations where we will be dependent on government supplies and stripped of our freedom to hunt and roam as we have always done." Sarah's heart clenched with fear, not for herself, but for Clesion and for Mako, for the people who had become her people. "What will you do?" she asked. "We will move deeper into the canyon country, where the soldiers' horses cannot easily follow. We will hide until they pass, as we have done before." He paused, then looked at her directly. "But Sarah, if they find us, if they discover a white woman among us, you could tell them you were held against your will. You could return to your people. You could have your freedom back." The offer hung between them, genuine and heartbreaking in its sincerity. Mako was giving her a choice even now, even after everything. Sarah looked at Clesion, who had stopped singing and was watching her with wide, fearful eyes, as if he understood that she might be taken from him. She reached out and pulled the boy close, then raised her eyes to meet Mako's gaze. "I am already free," she said firmly. "I am free because I am where I choose to be with the people I choose to be with. My family is here now. If soldiers come, I will hide with you. I will protect Clesion with my life if necessary. This is my home." Something shifted in Mako's expression, a softening around his eyes, a subtle relaxation in his shoulders. He moved around the fire and sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. His hand reached out tentatively and covered hers where it rested on Clesion's shoulder. "You have become Apache in your heart," he said softly. "My son saw this before I did. He is wise beyond his years." The soldiers did come, sweeping through the territory with their blue uniforms and their rigid formations. But the Apache knew every hidden trail, every cave, every source of water that did not appear on any white man's map. They moved like shadows through the land, and the soldiers found nothing but abandoned campsites and cold fire pits. During those tense days of hiding, Sarah proved her commitment to her new family. She kept Clesion quiet when the sounds of horses echoed through distant canyons. She helped carry supplies up treacherous cliff paths. She worked alongside the other women without complaint, earning nods of approval from those who had doubted her strength. When the danger finally passed and the soldiers moved on to search other territories, the band returned to their village with a renewed sense of unity. Sarah had been tested and had not been found wanting. Even those who had opposed her elevation to the chief's wife began to treat her with grudging respect. That night, as they settled back into their dwelling, Mako pulled Sarah close for the first time, not as duty or obligation, but as genuine desire for her nearness. "I did not think I could feel this way again," he admitted quietly. "After my wife died, I believed that part of my heart had died with her. But you have shown me that the heart is larger than we know, that it can hold grief and joy together, that honoring what was does not mean we cannot embrace what is." Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the strength of his arms around her, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "I came to this land looking for a new beginning," she said. "I just never imagined it would look like this. But Clesion was right to choose me, because I needed you both as much as you needed me. We have all lost so much, but together we have found something worth holding on to." Clesion, supposedly asleep on his bedding, smiled in the darkness, his young heart full of contentment. The seasons turned, and Sarah's transformation completed itself. She learned the songs and the stories. She mastered the skills of Apache life. She became a mother to Clesion in every way that mattered, and the boy flourished under her care, his laughter once again a common sound in the village. And she became a true wife to Mako, their relationship deepening from respect into genuine love. He taught her to see the land through Apache eyes, to understand the sacred connection between the people and the earth. She taught him that strength could be gentle, that change did not always mean loss, that sometimes the most unexpected paths led to the destinations the heart needed most. Years later, when Clesion had grown into a strong young man and had chosen a wife of his own, he would tell the story of how his father had given him the power to choose a mother, and how he had pointed at the white captive. He would speak of the courage it took for both his father and Sarah to honor that choice, and how their unlikely union had taught the entire band that family was not always about blood or tradition, but about love, commitment, and the willingness to build something new from the ashes of what had been lost. And when people asked if he had chosen wisely that day at sunset, Clesion would smile and say, "The Spirit sent us what we needed, not what we expected." And in the end, that made all the difference.